2, 3, 4.
GC Chat.
Welcome to GC Chat, a genetic counselling podcast. We are your hosts, Ashley and Elle, and we are practising genetic counsellors in Sydney. This is a podcast about the counselling in genetic counselling, which often sets us apart from other genetic health providers.
These episodes are designed to be listened to in the order that they are released. We will introduce a scenario based on a real case in this episode. We will then further reflect on this case in the next episode and then introduce another scenario.
We don't have all of the answers, and we want you to help us to reflect on the cases together. Please contact us if you have any reflections or questions about the case. We want to hear from people with a range of experience. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter by searching GC Chat Podcast, or you can send us an email at gcchatpodcast@gmail.com. If you send us a private message or email, we can promise that your identifying details will not be shared in the podcast without your consent.
Just a reminder that all cases are de-identified in accordance with Australian and US privacy legislation. Any names used in the recording are pseudonyms. Our episodes contain material that may be distressing to some listeners. If you feel you need support, please contact your local crisis centre. Please refer to our website for more information.
Today we'll be discussing a case involving Freddie and Sarah and their little boy Charlie, who was suspected to have a genetic condition. The counsellor involved was asked to speak to the family about exome testing, as previous investigations had not yet confirmed a diagnosis for him.
Both had poor health literacy, and Freddie spoke English as a second language, but did not require an interpreter for medical appointments. The counsellor made contact initially with Sarah by phone.
I found her very difficult to get information from. She wasn't very warm. She was quite difficult to speak to and build rapport with. Eventually, she started asking some questions that set off some red flags in my mind. So the first sort of question was about who would get, if she did agree to genetic testing for Charlie, who would get a copy of those results. So my thought, because I had encountered this before, I thought that she potentially was worried about privacy, which she kind of went along with, and then eventually said, but I would get the results first, like me, as in his mum, would get the results first. And I just sort of stopped for a moment and thought, I wonder why you're asking me that. So I asked her straight out, and she said, there is a small chance that Freddie's actually not Dad. It was very hard to engage with her over the phone. I just felt it wasn't working, trying to explain the genetics behind, Charlie's suspected condition, but then also, how genetic testing works and why non-paternity or misattributed paternity might be an issue. So I decided to ask if she wanted to come in for a consult.
So the counsellor arranged to meet Charlie's mother Sarah at her own face-to-face appointment without Charlie's father Freddie being present. The counsellor was surprised when she went out to the waiting room to meet Sarah and Charlie, and
Freddie was there as well.
So for the counsellor, her perceived plan was to further discuss the non-paternity issue privately with Sarah, but Freddie was there expecting to discuss genetic testing.
It was super awkward. He had limited English, so it was very difficult. Meanwhile, Sarah was kind of making eye contact with me and with her eyes saying more than she could, with the words. And so basically I just went through the consent with them. And then at one point, I think Charlie got quite upset or was making a lot of noise. So Freddie took him out of the consult room. And it was just kind of this mad rush to quickly talk to Sarah about what I had intended to talk to her about. She was apologetic for him being there, but also not particularly. It was as if I should have expected that he was there. And she said, no, he always comes to things. We, made a plan that I would call her the next day and follow up. And I kind of just wanted to really let her know that if we did, depending on what the testing was that we were going to go ahead with, which hadn't been decided at that point in time, potentially this might be an issue and it might come out, and that obviously we would have things in place to help explain that, but one explanation would be non-paternity. She only liked me to call her on certain days when she was at work, when he wasn't around. So, yeah, luckily it was kind of the next day was a good time for her. So that was my plan. He came back in the room. We ended it with them signing consent for genomic testing broadly. And then I just said, look, we'll have to have a talk with the genetics doctor about what tests we're actually going to end up ordering, and then I'll let you know.
On the follow-up phone call, the genetic counsellor identified some clues that Sarah was experiencing domestic violence. She asked some questions to try to clarify this.
She presented a bit strangely again on the phone, just really felt like she was kind of holding back and not really engaged. And I think I asked, if everything was okay, and she said that she felt that Charlie's condition was a punishment for her having had an affair outside of her marriage. Talked through that a little bit, and I guess tried to explain genetics and that it's no one's fault and it's not anything that, we did or didn't do in the pregnancy. And it's hard. I think that things like that are instilled in people's minds when they blame themselves. I think that guilt will be there forever for her. And then she started to talk about some things that, again, were worrying. So I made a comment about, I wasn't expecting that Freddie was going to be there, and I'm sorry if we misunderstood, but I thought that it was just going to be you and me so we could talk more about this, but, of course, happy to talk about it on the phone. And she said, oh, yeah, he comes to everything because I don't go anywhere except for work without him. But then there was just a few more things that she subtly said in the next sort of 10 minutes or so that we were talking, just raised, again, some red flags for me. And so I ended up asking her whether she'd ever feared for her safety. Yeah. And she said yes. And I checked in to see if she was fearing for her safety at this very point in time. No, she was at work and she was safe. But essentially disclosed that throughout their marriage he'd been quite violent in the home. It was only ever towards her. But essentially, yeah, he was quite controlling. She wasn't allowed to go anywhere except for work without him. Which is why she came to the appointment with him, because he wouldn't allow her to come to the hospital without him being there. So made a contract to her that I was going to speak to a social worker at the hospital to see if we could do anything or get her some help, that we wouldn't do any testing. I wouldn't order anything until we'd worked out a plan. And of course, if we did end up going ahead with testing, that we would be sure to, give results in a safe environment and not put them at risk. So she was incredibly worried that if Freddie found out that Charlie was not his, that he would harm Charlie and her. That was her main concern. In saying that, when I did say that we were going to postpone the genetic testing, she did get a bit upset because she also really wanted a diagnosis for Charlie as well. And I guess from what she had said to me, this was the first time she'd told anybody.
Following this contact, the counsellor discussed the disclosure of domestic violence with her genetic supervisor. The counsellor recognised that the most appropriate course of action was for Sarah to be referred to social work. She contacted this team, who agreed to contact Sarah directly to address this issue and make further safety assessments.
I guess once social work got involved a little bit more, I got to step back from that role, which to my relief, because I think, it was a lot and I felt quite responsible for this woman's safety because she hadn't disclosed to anyone else, and it was quite a burden, I think.
There are some types of tests that may be more likely to highlight the possibility of non-paternity than others. For example, in a trio exome, usually no other family members have the same condition. You would collect a DNA sample from the child and both parents. The child's exome would then be analysed and compared with that of the parents. This helps to immediately exclude benign changes in their exome that are unlikely to cause disease. For this family, the team elected to proceed with a singleton exome rather than a trio because of the risk of non-paternity. DNA was collected from Charlie only for a single exome test.
The counsellor made a plan to meet Freddie and Sarah once results were available. A variant of uncertain significance in a gene that was consistent with Charlie's diagnosis was detected. This was associated with an autosomal dominantly inherited condition. The lab recommended that parents be tested too to see if they shared the same variant. If they did, it was unlikely to be the cause of Charlie's condition. If they didn't, then it could further provide evidence of pathogenicity of the variant.
The team reviewed the harms and benefits together of arranging parental segregation studies in Sarah and Freddie. They decided that based on the likelihood of revealing non-paternity and the risk to Sarah, Charlie and her other children if this was revealed, that the potential harm outweighed the clinical utility of further testing.
And that's where things have left. That's where they're at.
Wow.
Is that we think we've found the cause, but we can't prove that it's de novo, so we can't get that bumped up to likely pathogenic or pathogenic. From the point of view of Charlie, the medical team are treating as if this change is the cause, which they've seen children with this gene change before, so they think that, they've put him on different meds and so on. So I think that's kind of the best scenario that we could hope for, given the complexity of the family situation.
We asked the counsellor what strategies they used for self-care during this difficult case.
I'm very lucky in that I have great friends that understand my job, and a supportive partner and supportive family that kind of understand the role that I have, and sometimes it's really draining and emotionally very hard. So they tend to look after me, try and do things, outside of work, make sure I leave on time. Not always possible, but try really hard. And just taking care of my mental health as well.
This case has raised a number of counselling issues. Just to name a few: non-paternity, the need to be client-focused and adapt to the changing needs of the client, and awareness of our limitations as a genetic counsellor.
Thanks for listening. We look forward to discussing the scenario further on our next episode. Write to us or start the discussion on social media with the hashtag GCChatPodcast.